Well, good morning. I'm John Lucas. I've been asked to do a demo on box turning. I've been making boxes for a long time, probably 35 years or so. I first kind of learned how to make them. A gentleman named Chris Stott came down to Tennessee and did a demo. He has a really excellent book called 50 Designs for Boxes. I highly urge people to get this book. It is excellent. The other one that is also just as good, but also has a lot better information on box design and box cutting is Richard Raffin's book. Cannot tell you enough to buy these two books. They're so good to give you ideas on designs when you have that blank slate and can't come up with a good design. As you can tell, when I started making boxes, I've made about every kind of lid you can imagine, the easy slip-off ones. I do decorations on the inside sometimes. Was making this one day and thought it would look like a cupcake, so I actually made a cupcake box. I do screw lid boxes. Come off. So what we're going to talk about today is just basically a basic simple box, probably a lot like this one right here. It just has a nice fitting lid, nothing real fancy, and just a clean box, and maybe talk a little bit about some texture. Okay, we're going to make a box this morning. I use a drive center, and I put my drive center in my chuck because we're going to put a tenon on both ends, and I need to pull this right back out. If you don't have a shoulder on your drive center, you can't do this. It also, of course, obviously has to stick out farther than your jaws. You wouldn't have to do that. You could put your drive center in, turn it, take your drive center out, put your chuck back on. It just slows everything down to do it that way. So I'm going to find my centers. Now, when I first started turning using a spindle roughing gouge, I was doing everything back and forth just like this. And that works just fine, but if you can see on this piece, it's a little hard to see from some camera position, but the grain runs out through here. Yeah, in that direction right there. And if I go back and forth, I could rip that shoulder off, and if it goes a certain way, it may actually tear into my bowl that I want. So I found that what I'll do on a piece like this, it's really out of square, is I'll push the gouge right straight in. Now I'm rubbing the bevel. I find the bevel, I lift it up till it starts to cut, and then I push in. And what I'm doing when I do it this way is I'm cutting across the grain. So if we stop the lathe and look at it, you'll notice this is real clean. There's no tear out. That means that I'm not going to accidentally lift up the grain of my wood. So what I'm doing is there's a shadow created. I push it in until the shadow's gone. Now I know it's round. It's just a very fast way and a very safe way to turn. When I go to the end, I turn the flute in the other direction. So the first thing we do is we get it round, and then we decide on the shape that I want. We're going to make a short, squatty kind of box, and I want the lid to be probably right about there. This half, we're going to turn a tenon on both sides, so I'll do that real quick. I'm using 2-inch jaws, and they're dovetail jaws. So I cut down what I do is I tilt my spindle, my parting tool down so it's cutting down into the wood, and this left shoulder right here cuts against the wood, and that squares up the shoulder. What's important when you put any kind of turning in a chuck is that the shoulder sits on the jaws of the chuck and sits very flat. So what I'm trying to do is just clean that up, and I want to make it dovetail shape, and that gives me that square shoulder. Now what we would do is, let's say that I want to make my box lid probably about that deep. It's going to be just a simple little lid. Sketch it in there, and this is going to go down probably like that, just a short little squatty box. I want to make the lip of my box. So I'm going to take my parting tool. I have to kind of decide a little bit right now how big of a tenon I want to use to grip the lid with. I want to decide on the shape of the box a little bit. So I'm going to part just a little ways down, and I'm going to go ahead and start shaping my box just a little. So I have a little bit of an idea. I'm using a 1/2 inch spindle gouge. And that's going to be kind of roughly this box right there. And the lid is probably going to be in that direction. I just want to rough these out because when we reverse it, I need to know how deep to make each portion of the box. Now I'm going to make my lip just a little bit bigger. And a little deeper. I may want to make that box a little shallower. Now one of the tricks that Chris Stott taught us is I'm going to take a thin parting tool and cut in there. But what I'm going to do is, if this is the full length of my tenon, I'm going to cut in about here. I want to leave a tiny shoulder on the top of my box. The top is going to be the female portion, and the bottom is going to be the male portion. And I want to leave a tiny lip. That will make it much faster for us to hollow out to make the lid and the bottom fit. And I'll show you that in a few minutes. So I go over here and I'm touching that shoulder. I'm going to move to the left just a hair, because I want to leave just the tiniest little piece. Now I'm going in fairly deep, and I don't want to take a lot of off my tenon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this tool left and right. So as I go in, I'm going to go to the left, and I'm going to go to the right, then the left, then the right. What that does is it opens it up inside so it's not binding my tool. And I'm going by sound now because I can't see. I usually have a light back here where I can see that little small tenon inside. That's getting pretty small. Okay. Ideally, I don't want to break it off. I want to be able to twist it off like that. And I got lucky and didn't throw it off that time. So we'll put the lid on. I always hollow the lid first. This one, for hollowing the box, I'm going to show you two techniques. Normally on a deeper box, I would drill it out the center. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to take a spindle gouge. And as long as you're cutting dead center, you can push right straight in. It'll actually drill a hole. I tilt it so the flute is to the left a little. And I arc the cutter out and I can cut the hole. Now right here is my little tenon that I left that's going to fit the box. This is not super critical at this stage. So we'll just go in. When this tenon disappears, I don't want it to disappear actually, because I'm going to make the other tenon fit this lid. So I'm going to go that far right there. You can use a negative rake scraper if you want to clean this up a little bit. Very quick and easy. The tool that I use is a Hunter Badger. Got to lower this just a little bit. The Hunter Badger, instead of scraping, actually cuts. When using the spindle roughing gouge and doing this cut across here, I'm actually kind of scraping. It's cutting a little bit, but by using this Hunter tool, it cuts like a ring tool. Get little shavings coming off there. Just leaves a beautiful finish. And then when I get out that steep wall, I'm actually shear scraping. So we'll just make another little pass. And then we'll come out that wall. There we go. Now I want to clean this shoulder up. I left a little tenon on there, so I know that this opening is smaller than the opening on the bottom. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to cut this off. Now this is end grain, so I don't want to be cutting against it. I'm going to use this same hunter tool. And just square that up. I'm going to check it real quick. Make sure that it's flat, or if anything else, ever so slightly concave, because I want that outer lip to sit on there. And that's good. I want that needs to be deeper. I was looking at my tenon here. I want this to be deeper. So, again, I can push it straight in, I can drill it. Now another thing you can do is you can take a parting tool. We need those jaws to be perfectly parallel. I'm going to go in there that deep. That should be deep enough. We'll go back to my hunter tool. Now as I get close to the edge, I rotate the tool slightly. What I do is I start with the tool about 45 degrees, and as I get close to that edge, I rotate it over like that, so this bottom lip kind of bumps against it. That keeps it from catching on the wood. The one thing we want to do, we want that jaw, we want the male and female tenon to be parallel to each other. So what I do is I put a ruler in there, and I move my eyes, which I can't do because of the camera. But the ruler is angled to the bed of my lathe very slightly. So I need to go back with my parting tool. And actually it turns out most of that group was parallel. We'll test that again. That's pretty darn close right there, parallel to my bed. That just makes the lid fit better. Yeah, I can get my eyes over it now. So at this point you would go ahead and sand or do whatever you need to the inside. The one thing I'm going to do for interest's sake is just add a little texture. I'm going to use a little Sorby mini spiraling tool. And we'll just put a little texture in there for people to see, and we'll add a little detail ring outside it to make it stand out. There we go. Now we'll work on the bottom. There we go. Make sure it's running true. It's off just a hair. Open up the jaws and twist it and just push on it a little harder. I'm going to true up the outside anyway, so that's good. Now what I want to do is I want to make this tenon fit my lid. As you'll see when I try this, yeah, it won't fit yet. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. One is you can put a real slight chamfer on the end. Now it put a burn mark on there. That is the size of my female tenon. Now you got to sneak up on this because we want a pressure fit. Ideally. I do want to square up that shoulder. There we go. So, a little more. This takes time because what we want is a friction fit that's tight enough that the lid won't move and I can turn all of it together. And that's extremely close. What I want to do is I want to take that point off right on this corner. Because sometimes that sharp point will keep the lid from going on correctly. There we go. So we'll bring our tailstock back up, at least for initial shaping. There's kind of a fine, if you put your box lid on and it doesn't fit properly, you can put tissue paper in there, you can kind of wet the box so the wood will swell a little bit. There's 2 or 3 ways to get that lid to fit if you miss it. Right now mine fit really good. The problem I may run into is getting that lid back off in a minute. Yeah. So I've actually got it too snug. So we'll go back and take just the tiniest amount off. I mean, I think I'm taking thousandths of an inch. Oh, see, I got it too small. So what we'll do is, and we'll put it on there. Because what I'm shooting for, this is I like a kind of a loose fit like that on the final box. Because when people pick up your boxes, what they do a lot of times is they pick the box up by the lid. If it's a air pressure type fit, they'll be looking at the box and the bottom drops off and hits the floor. So I either like a snap fit lid or I like a loose fit lid. Now there are ways to fix this as well. There's several ways that I use. One is I just put a very thin layer or 2 of CA glue and go back and just cut that CA glue down a little bit till it fits perfectly. That works pretty well. When I have a really, really loose fitting lid, what I'll do is I'll take either black or white thread and I'll wrap all that thread around it and I'll glue it with thin CA glue. And then you can go back and trim that down. That's what they actually do when they're repairing clarinets, is to make a joint fit better. So ours is just a little bit thin. That's about right. I need to be able to get the lid back off after I turn it. That was the one nice thing about doing screw-on threads, is you can always get the lid back off. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and use my spindle gouge and we'll shape this. I want to get rid of some of this to get me room to work. So gently, I want that shape right there. Now you could do anything. You could have the lid bigger than the bottom. You can do whatever you want. It's your box. In this case, I'm going to show you how to do one where everything blends together. Just real light cuts. I'm controlling this cut with my body, not my hands. I'm shifting my body to the left. There we go. I think we'll call that the bottom of the box. Now I need to decide what I'm going to do with the lid. I think we're going to just kind of round it over. And we'll just do some shadow work or something. Now most of the time when I'm cutting, I tell people not to put the pressure on the bevel. You want it to be as light as possible so you're getting the cleanest cut you can get. When you're doing a box lid like this, I actually apply pressure to the bevel to keep the lid from coming off. So we're just going to I don't want to cut this off flush with the lid, because if I do, I can pull out fibers and break it. That's not a good thing. Let me get that tail center back out of there. Well, I kind of like that. So I think what I'll do is just do that. And then I'll go in here and I'll undercut this a little bit. Just a couple of cuts. Another cut. Just a tiny amount. There we go. That gives me a pretty nice little lid. And I've got a pretty fair finish on it. I got a little bit of I didn't push this in quite far enough. There we go. Just clean that up. Now what I would do is sand that, which I've got one little bump right here where I wasn't perfect with my cut. The trick to getting clean cuts like this is not forcing the tool. You use the bevel, you find the bevel. I'm controlling this cut with my chest. There we go. Now I watch the back side of the turning so I can see how the cut progresses. And you see how slow the tool's moving forward? What I'm doing by relaxing my grip and letting the tool do the cutting, I don't get any tear out. It's almost a glossy finish on that. It actually has areas where the bevel was rubbing too much and burnishing the wood. So I would want to touch that up just a hair. And to do that, I'm going to do that with sandpaper. I'm going to show you shear scraping techniques. There's a couple. One is I can take my spindle gouge. I grind wings on my spindle gouge. I guess y'all couldn't see that before. I grind my spindle gouges exactly the same way as my bowl gouge, except that I have a steeper bevel. So what that does, it gives me a really long wing, and I can use that to shear scrape. I use that bottom flute. So if I didn't get an absolutely perfect cut, got some tool marks, or maybe you have a slight bump, and the easiest way to tell if you have a bump in it is to run your fingers down the wood, not like this. It's coming down this way. You can feel the difference. Got a little one right there. There we go. And if you do what I just did, I touched the toe to this thing over here, I got a kickback. You got to stop before you get there. You got to pay attention when you're turning. And there's a little bit of tear out right at the very bottom. I'm going to go back and slow my tool down. Let it do the cutting. Now we're pretty good. We got the tiniest amount of tear out right there also. Yep. I must have made that pass a little bit too quick a while ago. When I move my tool rest in, ideally what you would do is you would stop. If you're getting a little bit of tear out, just take your diamond hone and just touch that edge up. That's a 600 grit hone. And I'm going to make another light pass. And I'm going to slow down. I'm going to let the tool, I'm trying to feel the tool do the cutting. And again, I'm controlling the tool with my body. That's how you get that nice smooth arc. There we go. We have an almost burnished finish now. I like to disguise this joint. Well, you can do two things. Number one is Richard Raffin makes a nice box where there's a gap there. He actually highlights the joint. I like that. What I'm going to do is take my little point tool and I'm going to put a little point right there. And a little point right here, and a little one right there. Now there's several things you can do at this stage. I could round those over and make little beads. I can burn those. I'm going to do the burning technique because some of you may have never seen that before. To round them over using this tool, I'm going to round them and burn them. How about that? So I push that in there, and then I drag this lip around that way. Push it in the center. I tilt the tool to the right just a hair and drag it around. Now I'll do the same thing over here. I'll use my left hand Push it in, tilt it to the left and drag it. Push it in the center, tilt it to the left and drag it gently. And now what I've done is I've created two little bead shapes. And I think I'm going to round over this part to blend it in. And the same thing with that one. There we go. Okay, now, if you haven't seen the burning technique, my lid's going to try to come off. So what's going to happen is when I run that wire in there, it's going to try to burn the lid, but my lid is just the tiniest bit loose. It's going to cause a problem. So I'm going to put a tennis ball on there, push the tennis ball against it. I've got a big hole in the tennis ball on this side. Now we're going to get the tool rest out of the way. And we're going to take, I use either, where's my other one? I use either copper wire, which is kind of thick, or I use a piano wire, which somehow, there it is. Hard to see the piano wire one. Don't ever wrap the wire around your fingers. It will cut your finger off. Make some little handles for it. These are real fun to try to take on the airplane, by the way. They seem to think it's a weapon. So we'll turn the RPMs up. I fit it in that groove. I pull it around. It's friction that causes the burn. So you want to get a lot of wire on there. There we go. Pull it around this way. That's good. It's going to take a little more on that center one because that's where the lid fits. I may have to tighten this up a little bit. There we go. It may not burn. It's burned it a tiny bit, so that's okay. We'll let it do that. Now pull this away. Now what we want to do is, I'm going to create a little bit of texture on this top for fun. We're going to use a chatter tool. This is my homemade chatter tool. Blades I use. You can find these wherever they're building industrial buildings and they're using those steel 2x4s. Well, they throw these bits away constantly. They're scattered all around the ground. I grind them to the shape I want and just make a little holder of some kind. You can just simply grab this with a pair of vice grips and go in there and make it chatter. Oops, but don't worry about that. So I want to be cutting below about 9 o'clock, maybe 8 o'clock or so. You can use the round edge or the pointy edge. I'm going to use the round edge. Turn this around. What makes it chatter, of course, it's flexible steel. And chattering is totally variable. Everything, the RPM of the piece or the surface speed. In other words, it's going to chatter different in here than it will out here. It'll chatter differently depending on how much tool I have hanging over the tool rest. It'll chatter differently depending on how much this flexes. So it's really variable. It's kind of guesswork. So I'm going to tilt the tool down like that. I'm going to cut probably about 8 o'clock. If it makes a noise like that, you got chatter work. A little fine detail there. That's kind of nice. Just to show you another tool, use the same one I used a minute ago, the little Sorby pointed one. It has little points on it. I'll slow the RPMs down. That's too slow. And we'll just move back and forth. That creates a totally different texture. And the textures, like I say, are so variable. You don't know what you're going to end up with. It's kind of guesswork. And then we're going to take our point tool and create some borders for this. Yeah, that'll work pretty nicely. Okay. Let's see if we can get the lid off. There we go. Now what we do is we decide, do I really want that lid to fit that loose? Actually, it's not very loose. There's almost no movement on there. One of the problems you have with boxes is if you make a really good snug fitting lid, seasonally it's going to change. And a lot of times what I can do is I can rotate the lid 90 degrees and it'll lock on the box because the box has gone very slightly oval. There's 2 or 3 ways to make this. One is called snap fit lids. So for a snap fit lid, you want it to fit pretty good and you want just a little bit of a bead kind of on the inside of your box. And you want a little divot on the back of the tenon. So as I push that lid on, it's a real snug fit right there. And as I get down there, it just pops on. That's kind of hard to do. The other fit that I like, again, this one's kind of loose. I like that right there because that will fit seasonally. Another way to make them fit really good is to make this tenon really long. When you make the tenon really long and perfectly parallel, you get a little bit of a hydraulic, well, I don't know if you'd call it hydraulic, it's actually air pressure is actually holding on. As you pull it off, it takes a little bit for the air to pop out, and that's a really good feel, and that's almost what I've got right here. There's almost no movement. It's just about right. It was a little bit too loose to use to be able to turn the top without it, but that's a really good feel. So let's go back in and hollow this box. Now to hollow deeper boxes, I first drill it out to depth, and on a good day I have my tape laying around here, but I don't, so I'll just use this one. I want it to be about that deep, oops, too deep. About that deep right there. Lyle Jameson, who was teaching at the TAW Symposium this weekend, had a really good idea that I've got to do. He put an O-ring on here. This drill bit's dedicated, and you can just move that O-ring up and down, which is really fast. And we'll make that wonderful squeaking noise and drive everybody crazy. Okay, I want to check my depth and make sure I was right. I'm good. Okay. Now the advantage of drilling that hole first versus using the spindle gouge is I already know where my bottom is and I can use different tools. I can use my scraper, which I laid over here on the wrong place in my cabinet, can't find it. Again, you can use a negative rake scraper or a regular scraper and just go in here and cut. And you know, it's a little bit slow. You can use a spindle gouge. The tool that I like to use is the Hunter Viceroy. It's a scraper, but it's actually cutting instead of scraping. And I can go in either direction. I can cut out, and push in, pull back out. And the good thing about it is there's almost no learning curve. I mean, literally it's a scraper. So you just stick it in, you create the shape you want. Find my bottom in there. Okay, we're at the depth that we need to be, so I need to shape it just a little bit more. So I want my lip to be parallel right here, real gently. As I get past that lip, I want to go undercut a little bit. Very gently, just trying to control the shape. We'll go back in and see if I've got the feel correct. I got a lump right there, about halfway down. So. If you go gentle, you can feel that lump. That's pretty good. I got a lump about 2/3 of the way down. Very slight, but what I'm going to do is switch back to my, I call it my bottom finishing tool. It's the Hunter Badger. And I'm going to go in there, and I can't see it now because my head will be in the way of the camera. But I'm going to guess this tool has an 82 degree bevel. So I'm actually going in there and bevel rubbing. It has a 60 degree cutting edge, so that's why it cuts really clean, because this is a cupped cutter. So I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to, because it has an 82 degree bevel, I'm going to tilt the tool to the right so that I'm not rubbing the bevel. I'm going to pull it out till it starts to cut, and I'm doing this by feel. I can't see. There we go. Oops. Well, the problem I'm running into is there's a whole bump in the bottom. So I'm going to get rid of that bump. There we go. All right. Now I'm going to flatten that cutter out and do my shear scrape. Now, if you don't like that noise, you can put a rubber band around the outside and it'll stop that chatter. I've got that little bump right in the very bottom. So I'm going to go in here and go in the opposite direction. Cut that bump out. And we'll make another pass across the bottom. And I had a little bit of tear out right there. So I'm going to dampen that vibration with my fingers. Now there's a trick I want to show you with that tool. This is a giant version of the cutter. When I'm inside that box, if I have the cutter facing the box, right here, the wood is crossing right like that. So it's working just exactly like a negative rake scraper, or if you use a skew chisel flat on its side, that's how it's cutting, because I got that 60 degree edge. What I found was, if I rotate the cutter out slightly, in other words, I've got this tool parallel to my lip right now. So it's cutting at the very bottom, at the 6 o'clock part of the cutter. If I rotate the tool out a little bit, so I rotate the tool out, the cut moves up like this. Well, now the wood's coming across here at this angle, so I'm getting a shear scrape. So I get a cleaner cut. That's one trick for using this tool that other tools won't do. And if you look at that, all except that last little lip is actually shiny. I'm going to go back and just very lightly. That's pretty good right there. You could sand it easily with 400 grit, but we'll leave that the way it is. Now another tool that I use a lot on boxes and other things is this little thing. If you have a jigsaw, you just simply cut in like that, leave that arc, you drill a hole, and this allows me to slide this tool in and out. So I find my bottom, I lock that down, go over here and check it, and I've got a little bit fatter than 1/8 of an inch at the bottom. So that's not bad. So we'll go back and we'll take my parting tool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off barely below where I stopped before. There's actually a little ragged edge there. Again, I don't want to go all the way, because if you go all the way and the spindle breaks, it can tear out all the way through the bottom of the box. So what I'm going to do is go in here and cut to where it's almost off. It's just really slight. And then we'll stop the lathe. Whoops. I always do that. We stop the lathe and we'll cut it off with a little saw. And then I know I'm not going to damage my wood. So what I want to do now is I want to do the same thing I did on the box lid. I want to make a jam chuck for this. I want it to go inside. So we'll take, well, first thing I want to do is take a bowl gouge, or any what I've ever got, spindle gouge. I want to clean this up a little bit. And the only reason I'm doing that is you can take a set of calipers measure my box lid, lock it down. Now I go in here, and what I do is I go smaller than I think it needs to be. And I make a line, and I check it, and boy, it's just almost, I almost got it dead on. So that gives me a reference point, so I don't have to waste so much time. I know I can start right there and be fairly close. And then we'll take a lighter cut. I'm going to round that outer edge just a hair. Okay, needs to be wider. That's good. Now, if you freshly sharpen your parting tool, which I didn't do on this one, these edges left and right are actually sharp. They'll cut. So I could just simply pull the tool this way. I might get by with a little bit. Yeah, they're not super dull. But what I'm actually cutting was this surface right here. And since it slants downhill, it creates a fairly clean cut. A little more. Just want to have patience because I want this to be a good snug jam fit. Don't want to have to use that paper towel if I have to. However, boy, we're close. If you get a really loose fit on this, you can always use tape because we're not going to turn any of this part. We're only going to turn the bottom. See, I got just a hair too loose. Boy, it is so close. So what I'm going to do on that is I'm only going to use a little short piece. I'm not actually going to cover the whole tenon. Just going to go in there. There we go. That's pretty good. Now, you could use a jam chuck on the inside of your box, but the possibility of breaking your box is fairly high. So I much prefer to use a jam chuck that goes on the outside of the tenon. And to start off with, I always use tailstock. Just gentle pressure. I don't want to break anything. Just want to continue that shape. I think I'm even going to round it over very slightly. Now this is end grain. If you try to cut in like that, you're almost going to guarantee that you're going to get a kickback on the very beginning. So what you can do is, you could actually start that cut with a parting tool if you want to. What I'm going to do is just use the scraper. Use this as a scraper and go out here and clean up that edge. If you do it real gently, you get those curls. Then, now we have a place for my bevel. So then I can go in and cut in like that. I want to recess the inside, obviously. Now that I've got it cut pretty small, again, if I go in there and I cut in this direction, it's possible I can pull this out of my chuck. So I'm going to go in the center, this is end grain, and cut from the center out, just to get rid of this part. Then I'm going to go back, I'm going to rub my bevel, lift the cutter out. There we go, let it cut nice and gently. You know, as you get to the middle, the surface speed is so slow, you got to not push it. Mark Soleil out of Atlanta tells you, when you get to this point right here, you're not actually thinking about pushing. You're thinking about not cutting. Because the better you do that, the less sanding you have to do. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm not going to sand all that because we can do that. Normally I stop it at each stage and I sand everything before I do any texturing. I can sand all this stuff by making jam chucks like this later. So I won't do that today, but I'm going to go ahead and I like to put a little detail on the bottom of the box. I'm going to use a tool this time called an ELF tool. What the ELF tool is, the ELF tool is simply a Dremel cutter mounted in a handle. The little cutter comes out. It's a 1/8 shack. It's got a little magnet down in here. And you use it at a low angle and you just, depending on what angle you put at it, creates a texture of some type or another. It's a simple tool to build. I have plans on, I think it was American Woodturner that had plans for this. I forget. It was either American Woodturner or Wood Turning Fundamentals. Both of them you get if you join the AAW. So we'll turn the speed down. Put that in there like that. And we'll create just the slightest texture. Now what I found is if you go ahead and you put a little bead in the center, again I'm using that same little point tool. Get the center here. Put a little bead in the center, it sort of looks like a flower when you do that. So we'll just round that over a little bit. And we'll go and put a detail around the outside. And I think I'll put a detail at the base of the foot. And there you go. Nice little simple detail. When I first saw people teaching how to use all of the different texturing tools, his comment was, every time I add a texture, it adds $10 to the price. And there's our little lidded box. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me.